And we're recording. Let's cut over to the presentation. And we will get this show on the road. And let's broadcast. All right, well, we've got a few people on board already, so thanks everyone for joining. I know we're a couple of minutes out from starting. I will attempt to start pretty much right on time, but just to say a quick hello to everyone. Thanks for joining in. If you do want to say hello back or communicate with me, I can't see or hear you. But you can use the chat and the Q&A functions at the bottom of the screen to effectively to communicate and send me messages, and of course ask me questions as we go through. So if you'd like to test it out and see if it works, you're welcome to jump onto either chat or Q&A and send me a note about where you are and what the weather's like. I'm currently in San Francisco myself, so it is 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and the weather is actually starting to warm up. The first couple of months I was here was not particularly warm at all, but it's starting to get better. So I'm starting to believe that there is hope for a reasonably warm next little while. I hope so. Sydney, by the sounds of it, is overcast and muggy. Sorry to hear that, but I guess that's not unlike Sydney, really, is it? Of course, Sydney is my normal home. I'll be back to Sydney in about a month, just at the end of April. So I'm currently over here with one of the Austrade landing pad programs, getting Security Colony launched into the US market. And we're having a lot of success. It's been a really, really good program, and it's really helped to shape a lot of our thinking about the product itself and about how it fits together. Someone from Melbourne as well, Brisbane, and no one from Perth yet, but I'm guessing if my time zones are correct, it's probably still pretty early in Perth, so maybe we'll be waking them up. All right, so we might get straight underway. Look, again, thanks everyone for joining. I really do appreciate your time. This presentation has come about from a lot of the discussions that we've actually had over here in the US market. And it's one of those funny things where you take a product from Australia, travel overseas, have discussions about the product with people who don't kind of understand some of the context and some of the background, and you actually learn some really interesting things about how it's perceived and how it's understood to be positioned. And one of the messages that we've really heard loud and clear is one of the real strengths of Security Colony, one of the opportunities that it has, is to try and help with what we're calling the cybersecurity grind, with basically taking away some of those repetitive, low-value tasks that have to be done either for compliance reasons or just because they're a necessary part of the security landscape, but they don't necessarily make the most of your time. And that's an area where Security Colony can really help, and we'll talk a bit about that as we go through. As I mentioned before, a couple of you may have joined, there's a Q&A function and a chat function at the bottom of your screen. Please do feel free to ask me questions as we go through. I'll answer those questions either as they come in, if I can, or I'll deal with them at the end. Now, one of the first things that obviously is worth covering is who I am. So I'm Nick Elsmore. I'm one of the founders of Security Colony and also the consulting business Hyvant in Australia. I've been in cybersecurity now for close to 20 years and have worked on everything from small projects for not-for-profits through to security strategies for major banks and even some macro national level cybersecurity strategy projects throughout the Asia Pacific. I started Security Colony with Craig Searle back in 2015. According to the Deloitte Fast 50 and the AFR Fast 100, we're the fastest growing cybersecurity firm in Australia. And certainly it's been a rocket ship of a journey so far. And that then extends to me being over here in San Francisco, launching the US arm of Security Colony as well. But really the key part in this slide for me is I am genuinely passionate about changing the way that the industry currently works with cybersecurity professional services and with consulting, which I think at the moment is broken. We do have a scenario where we're spending a lot of money for things that have already been done somewhere else. And, you know, while it is a fairly significant cliche, you know, the reinventing the wheel concept really does exist a lot in cybersecurity, and we're trying to get past that. Now, my promises to you for this webinar. The first one is that I will appreciate and respect your time. So we will finish this webinar. It's only half an hour. I will get through it in half an hour. If there are questions that I can't get through in the time, I'll deal with them afterwards. But I certainly intend to respect your time. I appreciate you being here. Secondly, everything that we cover in this is real. And this is something that's really important to us at Security Colony and at Hyven. All of the content that exists in Security Colony is derived from real projects. It's something that a client, generally speaking, a client in Australia, has engaged us and effectively has paid us on a consulting basis to create. And what that means is that that client has held us to the standard that you would expect of that project. And so the difference that we find between the content that's being created in that kind of context and content that's being created somewhat arbitrarily is you genuinely are just held to a higher standard. So all the content here is real, it's in use in real companies in Australia, and the examples in the case studies that I'm going to talk about today are also real companies. For obvious reasons, I won't name who the actual companies are. I will provide some context around them, but they are real organizations. And lastly, I will, at the end, make you a genuinely great offer to join Security Colony. The nature of any collaboration platform, of any colony, is that it adds value just by having more people in the organization, in the colony itself. So we're really keen to have more and more people signed up, and we really think that we're going to make you an offer that hopefully will make that appealing. Now, jumping straight into the content. The first part is enterprise requests. Now, the context for this is a San Francisco-based technology startup. They sell online survey software to large companies. They have thousands of enterprise customers. As anyone who deals in that kind of space knows, one of the things that they get a lot is requests for cybersecurity frameworks, for incident response plans, for business continuity plans. They get requests to have their questionnaires completed, a whole range of things. And effectively, all of those requests are coming through to an organization who has spent pretty much its whole life to date building the product and getting it into the market. They simply haven't spent the time to put together documentation. So what's then come out of that is they have a lack of documentation. Their project really is not making progress. The project is struggling to keep up with the amount of work that they need to do. And ultimately what it means is that they're not being able to sell that project. They're not being able to close the deal with the enterprise client because, in simple terms, the enterprise client doesn't have the trust in their organization because they don't have the documentation that they expect to see. Now, the solution that we've seen come out of that is that they started with the resource library templates to put together that framework, the incident response plan, and the business continuity plan. And they managed to actually get all of that documentation put together and fully operating with about 4 days' work. So effectively, starting with those templates, they were able to go from there to the point where they could actually use those documents to satisfy the enterprise client's requirements in about 4 days of effort, which was a significant improvement on what would have been the case if they had to do it internally themselves, or in fact by giving it to consultants. Now, the outcome, the enterprise client made an immediate comment on the fact that the documentation maturity was well above what they were expecting. It really represented that the organization had thought well about security and really helped to solve their problem. So all the boxes were ticked, the enterprise signed off, and the whole thing got underway. So it was really a great result. Now, what I'd like to do is just quickly flick across to the system itself to show you what this looks like in practice. And effectively, what it looks like in practice is within Security Colony, going to the resource library page, which hopefully you can all see. And from the resource library page, there's the ability to effectively scroll through, see the documents that are available, and search for whatever document you need to get access to. And so within that, you can search for whether it's a framework, whether it's an ISMS, and you can find that. If you're all following me, oh, you're not, oh, hang on, I'm getting a message. All right, give me one moment and I will recheck. Apologize for the slight delay in this. It's the nature of technology. It always has an issue when you least want it to have an issue. But you get to see a close-up of me, so, you know, swings and roundabouts. How about that? All right. Okay, that's good. Cool, you can see. Thank you. And thanks for letting me know. So effectively, within the system itself, so you go into the resource library. The resource library has a lot of documents. One of the questions or one of the comments that we sometimes get is that there's just so much material, it's hard to know where to start. For that reason, we actually built this feature, the index. So you can click on the index, and the index is, as simple as it sounds, just a full index of all the documents that are in the library in a single page. So it obviously makes it really easy to search through, really easy to look at the material, and really easy to find it. And so that's a way that we find a lot of organizations sort of start to try and get an idea of what's in there and where to start looking. For an organization like the one we're talking about, they knew what they were looking for. So effectively, they came in, had a look for the ISMS. Looking for the ISMS, one of the key documents that we actually have in the library is what's called the Consolidated Toolkit. And the Consolidated Toolkit, which is this one here, is, as the name suggests, a full ISO 27001 ISMS. Now, for any of the documents in there, if you click on preview, you can get a quick view of what that document looks like. And as you can see, this is basically a listing of all of the different documents that make up the ISMS. So there's all of the documents themselves, and then there's the supporting documents that work alongside them. Now, in practice, all you do is download the document. In this case, it's a zip file. If you go into the zip file, effectively you can see it's a whole range of the necessary standards, policies, a strategy document that you would expect to have an ISO 27001 ISMS. And all of these documents are really simple in that you can just open them up and you can just use them straight away. They're designed in such a way that it really is as simple as doing a find and replace on the company name, and then obviously going through and tuning it to make it relevant to your organization. But as a starting point, our argument is that this will get you 80% of the way there. And it will get you 80% of the way there for a fraction of the time and also a fraction of the cost. And so that's how the organization that we're talking about here effectively went ahead with this project. They kicked that off, they used the tool, and they used that to put in place all of the documentation that ultimately satisfied the enterprise. So moving on to the second of the case studies, we're talking about breach monitoring. Now, this is a slightly different part of the site. And with breach monitoring, this was actually a federal government agency who had concerns about the potential for their users to reuse their internal passwords outside the organization, and also for them to reuse their official .gov.au accounts, again, outside the organization in random online sites. But they were trying to figure out how they'd get visibility of that. In the previous state, realistically, they, like every organization, knew that those accounts were being reused, but they had limited visibility of it. And so what they needed to put in place was some kind of monitoring for breach lists and spam lists and things like that to know whether or not these accounts were being used. One of the systems that we have within Security Colony is called Breach Intelligence and Breach Monitor. And so we vacuum up a whole range of systems like Pastebin, Pasty, Slexy, various Git sites, and we make that searchable. And the reason we do that is that a lot of those sites are used for dumping this type of material on an ongoing basis. It's an aggregation, it allows for daily monitoring, and I'll show you that in the example that I use in the moment. And what they actually identified through sheer chance is pretty much the same week that they had put the system in place, there was a major breach that ended up on one of these sites, and they picked it up straight away and could respond to it very quickly. The other really interesting thing that they found is this has actually been a really, really powerful part of their awareness training program. Because when an organization actually identifies that these particular users have had their email addresses pop up on Pastebin or wherever else, it's a really great point to then touch those users and say, hey, just want to let you know, go and look at this site and you'll see that your credentials are there, or you'll see that your email is there. And there's nothing that really brings home the security awareness message than when it really is personal and when it really is something that people can see and understand. So that's a really powerful part of the message as well. So to quickly just jump across to the breach monitor. So there are two parts to it in our site. There's the breach intelligence part, and then there's also the breach monitor part, which our premium subscribers have access to. Now, subscribers can actually run any searches that they like on this database. I ran intel.com this morning just because they're a big organization and make a useful demonstration case. And effectively what you can see here is across their results, if you click on them, you can expand them. And what they show you is effectively just all of the matches to intel.com. Now that isn't anything particular, it's just a dump of material. But if you go down a couple and look at this one, this is obviously a whole series of email addresses and passwords. The next one, likewise, is a particular user, their password, and it indicates that this is from a breach related to Spotify. So this is their Spotify premium subscription. Now, the reason that this is there is that it then allows you to contact those users, one, ensure that they haven't reused that password on any corporate sites. Two, make sure that they're aware of this breach and change their passwords for their own good security practice. And three, to use this, as I say, as a security awareness message, as it really is a powerful way of communicating to people that this risk is real. Now, the other nice part about it is you can also set up stored searches. With the stored searches, every morning you'll receive a message like this that basically gives you details of the matches from the day before. So this is an excerpt. I've obviously taken out the domains in this case and the email address, but effectively it just goes through and says, this is one of your search terms. This is one of the matches we found, and here's the details. And you'll find one of the things we do is some of these searches, some of these Pastebin dumps are actually megabytes of text. But what we do is we find the specific matches within that text, and then we just provide the 50 characters on either side of that, so that at an easy glance at that single email, you can get a really, really quick view of whether or not that's something that you need to be concerned about. So it's really, really fast and powerful way of getting an initial high-level view of dumps. Now, the third one that I'd like to talk about is our vendor risk capability. Now, where this one came in is actually with an international transport organization. They have over 10,000 suppliers, which on the face of it, we thought was a very, very large supplier base. We're actually talking to a telecommunications company over here at the moment that has 30,000 suppliers, or over 30,000 suppliers. And obviously when you've got 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 suppliers, really the question is, how do you get from that list to some list that is manageable and that you can work with? And so ultimately you need some kind of triage. Within that 10,000 suppliers, there are then hundreds of suppliers that are going to be relevant for assessment. And so within those 10,000, if you take out suppliers that really have no bearing on information security, you're still going to end up with hundreds that do have some potential role. Whether it's that they receive data, whether they have access, they're going to have some kind of risk profile. But there needs to be a way to triage them and cross-check them. For most organizations, they're spending between 3 and 4 days per supplier in completing vendor security reviews. And spending 3 or 4 days per supplier across hundreds, let alone thousands of suppliers, is obviously a pretty major endeavor. So in the current state, obviously it was known that within those hundreds of suppliers is probably a real risk somewhere, but it's hard to say where. So the solution that we looked to put in place was effectively to use the vendor risk system as partly a triage and also partly as a second validation of a very, very lightweight questionnaire process. So rather than spending 3 or 4 days on a particular organization, to really compress that down a lot, but then to use this independent vendor risk scoring framework as a validation of the questionnaire. And the reason that was important is questionnaires inherently are a self, they're a self-assessment. It's information that the vendor is giving to you. And so there's an unavoidable level of bias that's going to go into that. If you can introduce an external validation point, you can still leave that as is because you now have some external reference that's going to see whether or not that it looks like it stands up. If someone answers a series of questions and says they've got an amazing security program, but the independent scoring system says that they've actually got some fairly basic weaknesses in their internet configuration, that's something that you will then want to investigate. Whereas if they say they've got great configuration and fair enough, they actually do demonstrate that through their independent assessment, then it actually means you can probably wave them through and save a lot of time in the process. The outcome was that we managed to reduce the effort per supplier by at least 75% down to under half a day per supplier for completing these assessments. And a lot of that was through the automation. And the other thing about the automation is obviously it allows for it to be done on an ongoing basis. We run these tests on a weekly basis, in some cases on a daily basis, to see whether or not organizations are maintaining the same security maturity profile. Now, just to give you a quick view of this piece. So effectively, the vendor risk assessment tool opens up with a view of the various organizations that you've entered in. And to add in other vendors, you can simply enter them in, and a standard subscription has 10 vendor slots, so you can add in up to 10 vendors, but then additional slots can be purchased as well if you need to add in more. Now, these scores are included here, and you can then drill down by clicking View Details to actually get the full information that underpins that score. Now, this is another company that I'm involved in, hence I'm comfortable showing their information. With each of these checks, you can click the information side to actually get a view of what it means. And if it's a risk, it will also give you an indication of what the response is to take that risk away. In this case, obviously, it's as simple as there's no DMARC record found, and we recommend that a DMARC policy be defined for that domain. With others, it can obviously be a bit more complicated. And then we also geolocate all of the subdomain devices for that domain and place them on a map, which can be really, really interesting, finding out that there are servers that your systems are hosted on that are located in countries that you weren't aware of. Now, if you're interested in what these scores mean, and 6.5, a C, is that a good score or a bad score? We have a site called help.securitycolony.com that is effectively our knowledge base for the system. And one of the things we have there is this score distribution for the scoring algorithm we're currently using. So what you can see is 6.5 means it's pretty much in about the top third of scores. The average is somewhere between 4 and 6, but you can get a pretty good view based on what the score is about where they fit in terms of the broad spectrum of organizations that have been assessed. And there are well over 1,000 different organizations that are in the system. In fact, I think we're probably getting close to 2,000 now. So there's a reasonably good data set that actually underpins this score distribution. So that's how those organizations have been addressing the vendor risk issue. They've been using that system to basically take thousands to get it down to hundreds, or to take hundreds and get it down to the 5 or 10 or 20 that have the lowest scores, the lowest demonstrated maturity profile, to get a really good idea of where they should focus their attention in terms of more in-depth assessment. Now, where this ties into overcoming the grind, one of the things that I spoke about at the start is this idea that as information security professionals, there are tasks that we end up doing that really don't add a lot of value. And from my perspective, there are 3 things that we can really do to address that. And yes, they happen to tie into Security Colony, but if you take that away, I think they're still very, very valid. The first is reusing material. The more we can reuse material from elsewhere across the industry, the better off we'll be. The resource library is there to make available material that's been developed for other organizations so that you can use that as a starting point and so that things can happen a lot faster. You know that the quality is there because it's been effectively vetted by one of your industry peers. But you also know that it's real world and it's from essentially from the same country that you're in, and it's very, very tight in that way. And so reusing material will certainly help you to be able to focus on the 20% of your role that is genuinely unique and important. The other thing is finding set and forget services. The thing that I like about Breach Monitor is the fact that you can put in not just a domain name, but you could also put in a key project name. You could put in any sort of key piece of information that you want to monitor for, and then forget about it. And if it pops up in any of these dumps, in any of the breach lists, you'll receive a notification. But you largely don't need to think about it. And the more you can have these set and forget services and say, that's dealt with, that's handled, I'm going to put that to one side, the easier your job becomes. And the last one is really lightweight triage. And what I mean by lightweight triage, and in this case, I'm talking about vendors, but the same thing can be said for projects internally. If you've got this whole raft of projects in the organization, the chances are you can't apply the same security focus across all of it. So you need some kind of lightweight triage to go from the full set down to the set that you're going to focus on. In the vendor risk system, that's effectively what we've built. We've built a way to go from the hundreds of organizations that you deal with down to the 20 to 30 that you might need to focus on and talk to about security. So lightweight triage allows you to very, very quickly filter down so that you can focus on areas that are more important to you. So that's the core of the presentation I wanted to run through. In terms of the offer that I mentioned at the start, I said one of the things that we sometimes hear is when an organization joins and they get into the resource library and they see all of the questions that are there, or they see all of the material that's there, and they find it hard to know where to start. They have a particular problem they're trying to solve, but they're not sure where out of the 250 documents that solution is going to be found, particularly given some of the challenges in terminology in our industry. So we put together this concept of a fast start package. And what that effectively means is that if you sign up in the next 48 hours, we'll give you this, and it'll effectively just be included in the subscription. There'll be 2 30-minute calls, which we call our Accelerate calls, either with me directly or with another consultant if someone else is a better fit for your industry or for your type of organization. And effectively what those calls are about me listening and understanding the problem that you're trying to solve, the challenge you're dealing with, and then providing advice on 2 fronts. One, which documents, which resources within the resource library are going to be the best fit for solving that problem. And 2, giving you a view of what we see across our other clients. So what we see other organizations doing to solve that same problem. So you get a little bit of benchmarking, a little bit of industry coverage, and you also get a really, really clear path forward to solve the problem you're trying to address. And the document review and feedback package likewise can be used in one of 2 ways. So effectively, this is the ability to get a document reviewed and get feedback from our consulting team. And it can be used one of 2 ways. The first is that if there is an existing document that you have that you don't particularly like, but you're not sure what to do with it, you can send that through to it through to us. We'll review it. We'll provide advice around how to improve it or how to fix it and take it to the level it needs to be. And we'll also, of course, provide guidance on the material within Resource Library that would be useful to fill some of those gaps. The second option is if you actually want to take something out of the Resource Library and then tailor it and try and do that last 20%, then we're happy to receive it back after you've tailored it and provide feedback on any other additions and concerns that we might have or recommendations that we'd make. So effectively, you get one of those reviews included in the Fast Start package as well. And of course, you get a money back guarantee. That's nothing special in the Fast Start package. We always offer that. But effectively, that's saying if after the first one of these calls, you decide that it sounds like we probably can't help solve the problem that you have, that's fine. We'll refund the investment. There's no problem there. Now, if you would like to subscribe, it really is simple. You can either just email myself, nick@securitycolony.com, or my colleague, Michael @securitycolony.com directly, and we'll set it up for you. Or you can just click the subscribe button within the application. All free users now will have this subscribe button right at the top. If you click the subscribe button, it will take you straight through to the subscribe page, and you can go through and complete that process. So effectively, that's the offer that we have. Certainly, we'd love to have you as part of the community. We think that it's a really, really great offer to get you on board, really de-risks it. And yeah, thank you very much for joining. Now, I have had a couple of questions. I know I've got one more minute and I promise to respect your time. So just quickly, the first question was, are the documents industry specific? So yes and no. And I know that's a typical consultant type answer. The reason for yes is that within these resource library, there is the ability to filter by industry. And so certainly that will filter down documents that are definitely not relevant. A lot of the documents are relevant across industries. But then there are others, for example, I think there's a set of board speaking notes specific to financial services. I think there's a security strategy that's specific for health insurance. So there are some that are very specifically targeted at industries. But more broadly, a lot of the documents are broadly applicable, but certainly there are some that are targeted. And if you do have a specific industry in mind, please do feel free to reach out and we'll help with that again. Now, I do realize that is time. So again, look, thank you very much for joining. I hope that's helped give you a perspective on the system. I'd love to see some people sign up in the next 24, 48 hours. If you have got any questions, please send me an email. And again, thanks very much for joining and have a good rest of your Friday.